Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplant Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it around me. I like to talk about tropical houseplants. So today's topic was actually a viewer request, and I want to talk today a bit more about leaves getting stuck in cataphyls, and probably the best way of me showing you what I mean by that is actually showing you a plant that is going through it at the moment. Let me pick it up and I'll show you. So in front of me you might be able to see the philodendron gigas, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you might be able to see some of the foliage. And this one does have large leaves at the bottom, some smaller leaves at the top, because I wasn't getting it onto a janky support stick fast enough. But you might be able to see what the problem is. If I bring it in a bit closer, and hopefully it will focus on that. You can see there, that is the new leaf. What is encompassing it is the cataphyll, which is attached to the previous leaf. And you get the very meme-like bend that you get there that happens when the leaf is trying to straighten out. The new leaf is trying to straighten out and grow. So you might be able to see, if I bring this in a bit closer, that is one of the newest leaves, and it does come in this really nice coppery gold color. But this is something that a lot of people are usually struggling with in most households, I would say, unless they're growing professionally in a greenhouse. This is something that you might be coming across. So let me just put this down really quickly and let's talk a bit more about possibly what is causing the cataphyll to get stuck in the way that it is. So there are several things that might be causing that leaf to get stuck in the cataphyll and not being able to emerge. So sometimes what you might get is where that leaf, the stem of the new leaf is coming out, it's bent, as you saw just a moment ago, in a very, very awkward angle. And sometimes, depending on the leaf and depending on the plant, I was going to say I don't think I've seen this on many other plants. I think this is pretty exclusive to philodendrons. I might be wrong, do let me know. I think sometimes anthuriums can have the same issue, but in a slightly different way, and I'll touch on that a bit later on in the video. But you can see the stem is kind of bent, and then the leaf is stuck within that sheath there, and it needs to emerge. So there's a few things that might be causing that new leaf to get stuck, essentially. One of it might be just a mechanical issue. So potentially, if it's a new plant that you've just received in the post, it could be something that gets knocked, so mechanically knocked where that new leaf is going to emerge. And sometimes, usually when it's mechanical, you might get the cataphyll, which is around the outside of the leaf before it emerges. You might get that part browning and crisping, and essentially what it does, it creates a bit of a vice around that new leaf, and it's very difficult for that leaf to then emerge. The other issue that might happen sometimes is that just everything else is fine, there's no mechanical damage, but that leaf is still struggling to emerge from that cataphyll. I'm doing weird hand gestures. Hopefully this might be something that makes sense to you, especially if you've seen a leaf getting stuck in the cataphyll, and hopefully this is probably the reason why you're watching this video. But otherwise, I'm just making really interesting hand gestures. But, what you'd want to do basically is nothing. And I know a lot of people were expecting me to say something different, but I want you to do nothing to the leaf itself or even the cataphyll. I know the urge to do something and release that leaf that is captured by that cataphyll is going to be quite strong, but please do, if you can, refrain from doing that. And there's several reasons for this, basically. I've tried a lot of different methods because I was the same as everybody else. I wanted to see if I could release it. I've tried prying it out slowly. I've tried cutting the cataphyll on the side so I can release the leaf. I've tried slowly pulling it out. I've tried like putting water in the actual new leaf and cataphyll to help kind of moisturize it to come out, shall we say. Some of these things work, some of them didn't. The one thing that is consistent with a lot of these different methods, I think some people use Q-tips as well. One of the things that's consistent with all of these is that there is a very, very high risk that you're going to damage that new leaf coming out, and it might have holes. You might snap it altogether off the cataphyll. So it's very risky, and I know a lot of people might want to do it. I think I read somewhere when somebody else was talking about this that it's almost similar to watching pimple popping videos for the people that are into that. It's that kind of fascination to see something being released, however gruesome that might be in the case of the pimple popping videos. But yeah, it is one of those things that if you can avoid doing it, do avoid doing it, because generally in nature, majority of those leaves would have nobody sitting there going and prying them out slightly. Granted, in nature, this doesn't happen as often as it might happen in our houses. And let's touch on why it happens really quickly. So one of the reasons that this might be happening is the plant might not be getting enough light to give it enough photosynthetic energy to create that momentum that it needs to then pull that leaf out of the sheath. The other thing that could also be happening is that there might not be enough humidity around the environment of the plant itself. And that's something that's kind of key to be aware of, because sometimes some of us might have moisture meters around the different rooms that we've got the plants in, and it might say 60 to 70% humidity, but that's usually very localized to where the humidity meter is. So say, for instance, I had a humidity meter here, but the plant that I was talking about was the biggest marigold dense on the side here. The issue would then be that, yes, it's likely that the humidity is quite similar, but if there's anything that might be interacting with this plant here with this marigold dense, so for instance, there's a radiator behind this specific plant shelf. So the likelihood that this area is actually slightly drier than this area where the humidity reader might be sitting is quite high. So if you're really worried, maybe if you've already got a moisture meter, the humidity meter, move the meter closer to the plant that is struggling to release its leaf, and then take a humidity reading and judge it from there, because the immediate humidity around the plant might not be that high because of other factors. Like I said, for instance, this one, there's a radiator behind. So the air around that plant would be drier than the rest of the conservatory potentially. So that's one thing. Make sure that you have the humidity as high as you can possibly have it. Obviously, I've got humidity, so it's quite high, but for most average households, you're not going to be striving to get an 80 or 90% humidity unless you want to be living in a swamp. But just make sure that you're giving it a decent level of humidity around there, because sometimes the humidity might be the issue, is that it's also not getting enough of a kind of moisture that's accumulating between the cataphyll and the leaf in order for it to release. This also ties in quite nicely with what we were talking about before. If somebody's sitting there and spraying that cataphyll, and let me just pick up the plant again and you'll understand a bit more what I'm talking about. What you might be seeing there is somebody might want to spray that area there with water to hopefully moisturize that cataphyll enough so that that new leaf will then pop up. And you kind of get that because it's kind of along the lines of, if the humidity is high, then there would be moisture around that as well. The reason why you don't want to be spraying around there is, and this is coming from me, somebody who's got, I'm counting, at least 4 or 5 fans in this immediate environment, and I've got good airflow. That's another thing as well. Airflow might be drying out some plants because the humidity isn't landing on the cataphyll for long enough, but then you kind of need the airflow. And again, this links into why you don't want to be spraying this, because if you've got water sitting around that leaf, it could encourage things like fungus or mold to grow on it, or it could also harbor bacteria, and then you end up losing the leaf because it's then got fungus on it, or it's got bacteria on it. And the bacteria, depending on where it might be sitting, because a lot of people talk about root rot obviously coming in from the roots, but sometimes you can get rot going from the top down as well. So that's also something to bear in mind. So definitely try to avoid spraying as much as possible. The other thing obviously that we were talking about is using things like a Q-tip or using something like a blade or anything like that. Again, the risk of damaging a leaf is very, very high. And I'm trying to find one that I can show you. There you go. So this is a good example. This is one that does usually have this problem. And you can see there that this one was ripped because I was trying to get this out of the cataphyll. And some philodendrons, I'll talk more about philodendrons because I think this happens more with philodendrons. Some philodendrons, those new leaves, the new leaves that are in that cataphyll are quite turgid, they're quite stiff, they're quite succulent. And if you try to rip it out, it's very easy because they're also relatively soft and pliable at the same time. I know it's a bit of an oxymoron, both of those things. So it's soft, but it's also hard at the same time. It's very easy for you to pierce the leaf, and then you're going to have cosmetic damage. It's not going to harm the leaf. It's not going to harm the plant. It can still photosynthesize. But I know a lot of people will get rid of leaves with cosmetic damage, where then you are reducing the chance of that plant to be able to photosynthesize efficiently because you've removed its newest leaf because you damaged the newest leaf, which then sets back the plant in terms of how quickly it can grow, because again, you're making it harder for it to photosynthesize because you're taking away new leaves that could be photosynthesizing. Count how many times I mentioned photosynthesis there. Oh my God. So for all of those reasons, that's why I'm suggesting that you leave the leaf alone and let it do its thing and let it emerge on its own. A few things that have worked in my situation, in my environment, and I can give you this as a bit of a tip, is since I've moved most of my plants specifically into self-watering pond, and this will link into a reason I want to mention in a minute, I've not had as much of that issue. Obviously, the humidity is quite high in here. They get decent bright indirect light in the conservatory, so that's remained constant. The only thing that's changed is the soil to the pond, and I think it's got less to do with the pond, and it's more to do with the fact that it's in self-watering. And the reason why I say this is because within self-watering, the plant will always have water available around its root mass so that it can absorb as much water as it needs. Because the other thing is as well, if it's absorbing the right amount of water, and for instance, I'll kind of compare this to it being in soil and letting the soil fully dry out, or it being in pond without a water reservoir at the bottom, and again, fully letting it dry out, there might be situations where that plant is pushing out a new leaf and it needs more water coming in from its roots in order to essentially make the stems and make the petioles stronger and more turgid, essentially, so that they can actually lift that leaf out of the cataphyll. Very similar to previous videos that I've talked about when it comes to alocasias. So for instance, alocasias are slightly different. So alocasias are, if you don't start watering it a bit more when you see a new leaf coming in, what alocasia will do is it will sacrifice an old leaf for a new leaf. But again, it kind of harkens into that situation that the water demands of most plants, actually, when they're pushing out a new leaf, especially plants like the Gigas is a very slow grower and it takes a long time to produce new leaves and for them to emerge. So especially with those plants, it's got higher water demands during that period. And I can even see this with the self-watering vessel as well, because I'll see when it's pushing out new leaves, it's using the water a lot faster. And again, this links into something else that I've discussed on previous videos. Try not to water on a schedule. Plants' environment, plants' conditions could change. Like for instance, I'll give you an example. In this conservatory, yes, they get bright indirect light and the humidity is quite high, but now in winter, and again, depending on the day in winter, so for instance, today it's been a relatively sunny day, so there will be more actively photosynthesizing today throughout the day, so they'll potentially be pulling out more water from their roots. But on other days when it's completely grey for most of the day, there's not as much light available, it's obviously winter, so it's less hours, they're going to use up less water. So again, scheduling is probably not the best thing. But the other thing, so yeah, I think there's no other thing actually, sorry. This is the big thing for me, I think, is make sure that there is enough water available. Obviously, be wary of things like root rot. This is definitely a video that I'm hoping isn't going to stress people out, but I kind of wanted to get it across to kind of make it clear that the leaf releasing from the cataphyll isn't a straightforward process as you might think. There's a lot of things that come into play: the humidity, the light levels, the conditions, the water available to the roots. And all of these play a part in how some of those leaves can get stuck. Now, the other thing I will say is obviously there's certain plants that do this getting stuck on in the cataphyll much more regularly than other plants or other philodendrons. And the reason why you saw me laugh there for a moment is because I think most people that have got this plant will know the one I'm talking about. The philodendron pink princess is definitely one that will have this issue. So as I've mentioned, try to not try to help that leaf release and try to let it do its own thing. Maybe give it a touch more water. Obviously, make sure that it's still maybe not fully drying at the time when it's releasing the leaf, but it's going at the lowest level of moist. If you get a moisture meter, it will help you a lot, especially if you're using soil. Make sure that it doesn't go fully dry when it's bringing out new leaves, because that is also another reason why potentially they're getting stuck. Now, let's talk about the other form of when a leaf might be emerging in the cataphyll situation there. Let me put this down and I'll pick up another one and I can talk you through that. So I'm going lower, so you might be able to see this. You might be able to see this is the philodendron splendid, and you can see this is slightly different. So instead of the cataphyll being around the old leaf, this is coming in from a growing stem. And you can see there that all this needs to do is just unfurl, basically. So with plants like this type of leaf unfurling, and let me put this down and we can talk a bit easier. With those types of plants, it's a lot easier because essentially it's just, think of it like the new leaf is like a little cigar and it's kind of wrapped around itself and it just needs to unstick from itself and then it will open up. Sometimes even those ones get stuck. Those I find are less troublesome than what we were looking at with the Geigers, what you'll get with the philodendron pink princess. But again, it's the same principle. Something that I've not had a problem with, again, if it's in pond and if it's in self-watering, even with those, it will help because, and coming back to that big thing that I was talking about earlier on, it needs moisture within the roots in order to make that leaf a bit more turgid and to be able to unstick itself as well. And that's an overarching topic as well, is humidity is very important, especially with a lot of plants, especially in household environments where there's not as much humidity. But sometimes getting the watering perfectly right might still mean that even in a low humidity environment, like the average household or near radiators and things like that, you might not come across as many of the usual problems because of a lack of humidity, because there's enough moisture in the roots. The reason why a lot of people on here and online don't always necessarily recommend that, it is a very fine balance and it's very unique to your environment and your plants and how you care for them. So the likelihood that it could lead to root rot whilst making sure that that watering level is perfect is quite high. So that's why a lot of people don't necessarily recommend it. But that is another way that you can not have a lot of high humidity but still keep some of the fussier plants happy, is just making sure that they've got enough moisture coming in from their soils into their soil and their roots, but obviously without causing root rot. So one to maybe play around with. Don't do this with all of your plants, but if you really kind of want to dive in and get into the really kind of the nooks and crannies of that kind of theory, do that maybe with one of your plants and see how it fares. And then obviously if you're comfortable with what you're doing there and you're not having any of the same issues, then try transitioning to the similar kind of care for some of your other plants. But I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. I didn't mention anthuriums, but anthuriums are very similar to the philodendron splendid that I just showed you now. A lot of the times it's just a stem that's coming out with the leaf wrapped around itself. The biggest issue that you might get with anthurium leaves is mechanical damage rather than it getting stuck in a cataphyll a lot of the times. Hopefully this was something that was useful. I know a lot of people that have asked for this in the past as well. It wasn't just the viewer that asked for it recently. And I know it's something that troubles a lot of people, and this is probably not what you wanted to hear with me just saying leave it alone, but leave it alone. It will sort itself out, take care of everything else, and try to not mechanically pull it out, because the likelihood that you might damage a leaf or lose a leaf is quite high. If you don't mind, then fine, do you. But yeah, if you've got any questions or comments, if you want to have a discussion with everybody else down below, do drop it down below as always. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.